combined newsrooms of KARK4 and Fox 16. Breaking news coverage.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We are less than 30 minutes away from what could be the first execution in the state of Arkansas since 2005. Death row inmate Ledell Lee scheduled to be executed at the top of the hour, 7 p.m. Thank you for joining us. Everything changed late this afternoon after the Arkansas Supreme Court issued a stay allowing one of the 3 drugs to be used in executions. As a result, Lee's execution, at least for the time being, is scheduled to take place. Meanwhile, another execution scheduled for tonight has been called off. Stacey Johnson will not be executed tonight. Fox 16 anchor Donna Terrell joining me live from the Cummins unit where Lee is being held. And Donna, as you well know, the wheels are in motion for this to take place, at least at this point.
Yeah, they are, Kevin. We just spoke with J.R. Davis, who's the governor's press secretary, and he said, yes, everything's a go. 7 o'clock is that hour when Ledell Lee is expected to die. We were told, he told us that the witnesses, they're inside the Cummins unit right now. The families, they're inside the Cummins unit. And also there are 3 media people who will be witnessing this execution tonight. The governor will be waiting for that phone call, I guess, once it's over at the Capitol. He will not be at the governor's mansion like he was on Monday. And really, the only reason that's the case is because there was a planned event at the governor's mansion, so he just decided to go over to the Capitol. In terms of how he feels about things this evening, JR was telling me a lot of people have accused the state of trying to do this mass execution of 8 inmates. And, you know, he said basically the governor just feels like, I am just following the law. I am carrying out what the law says. And he was very pleased. He was very pleased when the Arkansas Supreme Court supported the state's efforts to be able to use the one drug that was in question for so long, and a couple times actually. So everything is really a go. It's quiet out here. You wouldn't know that there's an execution getting ready to happen. Ledell Williams, his last meal, you know, the traditional last meal. They always offer people who are facing execution a last meal. Well, in his case, communion. He wanted to have communion. So my guess is there was probably a priest or a pastor with him. So anyway, I'm going to toss it back to you.
All right, Donna, we're going to check back in with you a little bit later. I know there's a lot going on there. Let us know if there are any developments. But as Donna mentioned, Ledell Lee did have his communion rather than any specific meal. In fact, he denied eating with the rest of the prison population, an option that was given to him and afforded to him, but he denied. Donna did mention the 3 media that will witness. Specifically, they will be Sean Murphy with the Associated Press, John Moritz, who was with the Democratic Gazette, and a local TV station, KATV, will all be witnesses to this execution should it take place at the top of the hour. But as we have learned in the past, especially on Monday night, this can all change in a matter of minutes. 10 minutes before the stroke of midnight on Monday, the execution for Don Davis was called off. So from a legal standpoint, there are still things in motion, and for the very latest on that, we want to check in with our very own Marcy Manley. I know you've been extremely busy since the morning hours because there have been a number of changes that have taken place throughout the day leading up to this point. But as it stands right now, is there anything that could potentially change this?
There are still pending cases. The inmates have requested stays of execution from the U.S. Supreme Court, and I believe we're going to hear from Drew Petrimo later on about what those updates might be. He's monitoring that from Washington, D.C. We've also had a last-minute, if you will, lawsuit that's been filed on behalf of Ledell Lee by the ACLU, in which he's challenging some of the constitutionality questions of the law. when it comes to the death penalty in Arkansas. So there are still some pending cases out there, and it just remains to be seen if those are acted on or not. And so the time is sort of ticking for Ledell Lee at this point. He had multiple stays of execution denied by the Arkansas State Supreme Court, and those would have to be appealed to the Supreme Court of the United States as well at this point. So as time ticks down, we're looking at just outside of 20 minutes from 7. There is nothing officially on the books as far as we know that would prevent his execution tonight.
Let's look at the bigger picture, because originally we were going to have 2 inmates scheduled to be executed on Monday. Both of those were granted stays.
That's right.
Those aren't going to be happening this month at all. Here we are several days later, and now Stacey Johnson has been granted a stay. He will not be executed tonight, but yet Ledell Lee tentatively is scheduled to be. What makes his case a little bit different from the others as to why this one seems to be moving forward, yet the others are not?
Well, none of these orders, granted or denied, denying the stays of execution, were given reasoning, really. They just have issued them from the Arkansas State Supreme Court. One thing that I can delineate between these two cases right now is on Wednesday, you've seen that video of Ledell Lee walking down the hallway at court, and that was following a hearing where he requested DNA testing on the evidence in his case. And the attorneys argued quite heavily during that hearing that the controlling factor of that was having the hearing. It doesn't guarantee DNA testing, but merely having the hearing serves justice. And it would appear, based on the Supreme Court's order remanding for a hearing on the DNA evidence, that is the difference right now, as far as I can tell. And no one has indicated to me differently of the attorneys that I have talked to. We simply don't have reasons, though, behind some of these orders, either granting Stacey Johnson's stay or denying Ledell Lee's.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I know there's been a lot of concern among some people that the state Supreme Court, in some of its rulings, have not given any specific reasons as to why they've made certain rulings in that particular instance. But the wheels are in motion. We are now roughly 19 minutes away from this scheduled execution. Right. We want to check back in with my co-anchor Donna Terrell, who's live at the Cummins unit in Lincoln County. And I know there's a lot of other activity going on out there. I know there's a heavy presence, at least state police, that arrived within the last hour. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, they're absolutely here. Some of them are outside, some of them are inside. But I do have a question for Marcy. I'm just wondering, since Ledell Lee has these pending cases, one she mentioned in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, do they have to come back with an answer before 7? And if they don't, will he still be executed?
These are open cases, Donna, and so when you go to the Supreme Court and ask for their involvement, it's asking for them to get involved. They don't have to. They don't have to issue an order, and there's no real time frame for them to do that. I believe everyone is expecting that they would, just to have finality on that point, but no one that I've spoken with has said that that is a requirement. You know, you're sending these filings up hoping that you get an answer back that you desire, but until a court issues an order preventing that execution warrant from being carried out, that's where Ledell Lee stands.
Okay, and of course it's getting closer and closer to 7 o'clock. I want to bring in Fox 16's Mitch McCoy, Fox 16 and KARK. Mitch, you were inside. One of the things that we were hoping would happen is the media would be allowed to have pen and paper.
Right.
And they are, so they will be able to take notes as they witness the execution.
Sure, and that was provided to them. I'm pretty sure that was a last-minute decision in terms of bringing in that pad and that pen. I saw that at the very last minute as some of the Department of Correction employees were bringing that in as the media witnesses were leaving, and this was an escort. These 3 media representatives had an escort with them. They were fully prepared for that escort, and then they were then taken to the chamber.
From what I'm told by someone who's gone through this several times with the Associated Press, the witnesses, the regular witnesses, as well as the family, they're led into that room, and then the media would be the last to go inside. And part of the reason is because they don't want the media trying to ask questions. You know?
Yeah, and we did, during the testimony of Wendy Kelly, we were told that the IV lines start getting placed at 6:45. That's just in 2 minutes from now. And then you're going to have all your witnesses go in there. And then once everyone is inside that room, the curtains open right at 7 o'clock, according to the Director of Correction, Wendy Kelly.
Yeah, and that's the same thing Kelly Kissel, who actually have witnessed executions, that's what he said. Right at 7 o'clock is when the curtain will open, and he kind of explained the whole process and what it's like to actually be in there watching. Was there anything happening in the media room while we were outside that was notable? The
phone kept ringing, and this is a direct phone between Solomon Graves, the public information officer, the one who delivers all that information to the media, and we know that phone is significant because he was sitting next to that phone Monday night waiting for a decision from the U.S. Supreme Court. So that is a link between guards here at the corrections facility, because that phone rang and then the media was escorted out. And then, of course, we pull in the synopsis from Monday when we were waiting for the U.S. Supreme Court decision, and that phone would ring. That's a direct phone between higher-ups and the Department of Correction in terms of what information is relayed to the media and how things pursue further here.
Now, we have some state troopers. In fact, they're closing the gates right now to the Cummins unit, so you're not going to be able to go in or out at this point, and I'm sure that's for safety reasons, because they want to make sure that no one comes here and disrupts this execution. Did you see any protesters?
No, no protesters out here. There were on Monday 2 protesters, but I was told by a lot of the Department of Correction officials that they usually don't have protesters out here, and if they do, it's not a lot. A lot of people go up to the governor's mansion. Of course, that's in downtown Little Rock, so it's a little bit more convenient for people. But there is a very secured area for protesters if they do choose to come out here, and they're very designated by the command post for ASP.
Well, there are protesters in Little Rock. There are protests going on right now. Kevin, we're going to send it back to you to get a little more perspective on all of this, but it looks as though this is it. We're at that hour, close to that 7 o'clock hour, where this execution is scheduled to happen.
Yeah, in fact, we're about 14 minutes away from that scheduled execution. We were talking about protesters. Mitch McCoy earlier saying just moments ago that no heavy presence of protesters at the Cummins unit in Lincoln County. However, situation here in Little Rock a little bit different, as I've been told. We'll give you an update on that in just a moment. But we've actually got a live shot if we want to go ahead and punch that up so I can take a look at it. But I mean, as you can imagine, this is in front of the governor's mansion. As Donna Terrell pointed out, the governor not at the mansion this evening because of a scheduled event that took place at the state capitol. So he will be there. But this is the scene unfolding in front of the governor's mansion. Anti-death execution proponents, people standing outside, making their voices heard, as well as showing their signs of discomfort with the lethal execution that is scheduled to take place again now in 13 minutes. So they're making their voices heard over there. We've been talking a lot about the process involved when and if an execution is taking place. We'll get to that in just a moment, but I want to bring back in Fox 16's Marcy Manley, who's covering the legal aspect of it. And I understand we've been talking about the potential of the Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court, entering the picture. I know you've been monitoring that, as well as our correspondent, Drew Petrimo in Washington, D.C. Any update on that? What's the situation there?
Drew hasn't tweeted any updates. I haven't seen any term orders come out for today. And I'm also monitoring the 8th Circuit because we did have that last-minute lawsuit filed for Ledell Lee. The state had filed its answer to that complaint, and now simply watching and trying to see if there are any updates to this docket. And so this is relatively in real time, or has been throughout the day. Can't say how real time it'll be in the next 12 minutes, but we are monitoring that. There was also another case at the lower district court level where Ledell Lee was asking for a stay of execution. The district court removed that to the 8th Circuit, so also tracking that. It also deals with DNA testing. So monitoring those two right now. Obviously Drew Petromo in D.C. monitoring Supreme Court action up there. I'm trying to monitor it from here and just waiting because an order can be issued at any time.
In fact, Drew Petromo joins us live right now from Washington, D.C. Drew, are you hearing any rumblings in D.C. at this hour?
No, Supreme Court doesn't work that way. They are very quiet until they rule, and I've been monitoring my email very closely. Every time it vibrates, I'm quick to open it and see if it's something from the Supreme Court, because that's how we will find out. And they've been pretty good about putting out all the motions that have been filed previously, and also putting out orders even on Monday when that late night order came back that essentially halted the execution from going forward. So no word yet. There are two issues right now on the table of Supreme Court justices. One has to do with a lawsuit that we heard last week being argued over in federal court there. It mostly attacks one of the drugs in the 3-drug protocol, midazolam. It's a sedative. There was a big argument between lawyers for the state and lawyers for the inmates about whether that will do an adequate enough job to knock the prisoner unconscious before they are injected with the second 2 drugs that could cause some substantial pain if that sedative doesn't work. There's also another issue that stems from that same lawsuit where lawyers for the inmates said that because these executions are happening in rapid succession, or at least they were scheduled to at that point, that would put overdue or undue burden and stress on the people that are working at the prisons, and that could then subject the inmates to the consequences of some type of a mistake. So those are the two issues being considered by the Supreme Court at this hour. And with 10 minutes to go here, we're still just waiting for anything to come out.
All right, Drew, certainly keep us posted on the developments there. But there's still several things in motion as we speak. Now, when and if the green light is issued for an execution to begin, a number of protocols have to be followed. In fact, the state of Arkansas, as many of you know, have had years to try and iron them out to hopefully ensure a smooth process for all parties involved.
According to the state's lethal injection procedure, the executioner will enter the chamber prior to the inmate's scheduled time of execution. They will inspect what's called the injection drug box, ensuring all chemicals are accounted for. The gurney will be positioned so the deputy director and executioner can directly see the inmate's face and IV infusion site. At that point, the condemned inmate will be brought in and strapped down. The IV team, who are licensed and have at least 2 years' experience, will then insert 2 IV bags containing normal saline. When the flow is secure and safe, the warden will give the green light. The IV team will first administer 2 syringes containing 250 milligrams of midazolam, a sedative that is supposed to make the inmate unconscious. If the inmate is not unconscious, backup syringes of midazolam and saline will be given in a secondary infusion site. There will then be a 5-minute waiting period, at which point the deputy director will confirm the inmate is in fact unconscious. Once that is determined, the second drug will be administered. 2 syringes containing 50 milligrams of vecuronium bromide, a paralytic. Then comes the third and final drug. 2 syringes of 120 milliequivalents of potassium chloride will begin to flow, ultimately causing the inmate's heart to stop.
And that, of course, is if everything goes according to plan. If there is a problem, whether it be with the IV infusion site or possibly a collapsed vein, the deputy director will immediately reduce the chemical flow. The curtains will be drawn and the IV team will hopefully fix the problem. Once that happens, the curtain will then be reopened and the execution will continue. The protocol procedure, however, does not say what will happen if the problem can't be fixed. Of course, a lot of focus being on that one specific drug, midazolam, and whether or not it will, in fact, sedate the inmate. We'll be watching that very closely. In the meantime, we want to check back in with Fox 16's Donna Terrell out there. I know a lot of witnesses are there, but I'm curious about the victim's family in all this. Ledell Lee, as you know, killed 26-year-old Deborah Reese in her Jacksonville home. This was back in 1993. But our friends and family members, are they there and are they in attendance?
I am told family members are here. So family members of Ledell Lee, Stacy Johnson, we haven't talked about him a lot. He was executed. He was expected to be executed tonight, but he ended up getting a stay of execution, and that has not been lifted. So his family was or the family of his victim was probably planning to be here, but my guess is they're not here. But I am told that the family of the victim of Ledell Lee is inside Cummins' unit tonight, witnessing this execution.
And this, I believe this was according to a tweet by our very own Mitch McCoy, that Lee was obviously in a nearby room, and at 6:45 the actual process to move him into the chamber is beginning, which means that this has already taken place because we're 6 minutes away from the top of the hour. So I'm not sure if you've caught wind or word yet as to whether or not Lee is actually in the execution chamber.
Well, no one has told us that specifically, but we were talking with Mitch McCoy just a minute ago, and he explained that at 6:45 is when they start the process. That's when they start the process. And then at 7 o'clock is when they're scheduled to open the curtain for the witnesses to view what's going on. So, you know, I'm going to have Mitch come back over here. Mitch, just to be clear on this, because you seem to have the information, you're pretty well versed in how this whole thing will start. 6:45, we passed that time. Right. So one can assume that Ledell Lee is on a gurney, and they have started the process, connecting him to the IVs, et cetera, et cetera. Right. And once he's connected to all the IVs, or have the IVs in his veins, then they will open the curtains and they will administer the drugs.
Correct. According to ADC Director Wendy Kelly, she testified in federal court 1 week ago today.
About a week ago.
And she testified, she was on the stand from 4 o'clock in the afternoon to 9, 10 o'clock at night, and she testified that the process will begin at 6:45. IVs will then be placed around 6:45. And then the curtains will open at 7 o'clock. So at that point, you're going to have your witnesses in there. You're going to have members of the media in there.
And family.
And family.
If they choose to be in there.
If they choose to be in there. You're going to have your team in place. But here's what happens. Right before those curtains open, the members of the IV team leave the execution chamber. Okay. Because those are volunteers. Those are trained medical professionals. They're either paramedics, they're either physician assistants, or they're nurses. And then they will leave that room, and then the curtains will open right around, it's supposed to be 7 o'clock, but right around 7 o'clock.
Well, if they're not quite ready, you know, it could be a little after 7.
Sure.
Did she explain how long the process actually takes once they open the curtain? Let's say it is 7 o'clock. By 7:20, is this over, or how long typically?
Very possible. So they're gonna start the IVs, and then they're going to start the midazolam, and then after that midazolam is pushed into the body, they'll conduct a conscious test
to make sure that he's unconscious.
Correct. And then if he moves in any way,
they'll give him more.
They'll give him more. And then if he moves in any way, it's up to the Department of Correction to stop the execution. And that is possible. That's possible that they stop the execution. It all depends on how that conscious test goes. But a lot of the plaintiffs in the battle in the courtroom was, how do you know if he's conscious or not? Because he's strapped to a gurney. His wrists are strapped, his legs are strapped, his head is in between two devices, and then there's also a strap on his forehead. So that was some of the battle in the courtroom, which of course we found that stay issued by Judge Christine Baker, but that was ultimately overturned at the appeals level.
You know, Kevin, Kelly Kissel from the Associated Press told me earlier that one of the things that will happen before they actually start to administer the drug is there will be a person who will tell him, repeat his crime and why he's being executed tonight, and offer him a chance to make a statement, to say something. And I guess inmates decide if they want to say something or if they don't want to say something.
Right. And Wendy Kelly mentioned in her testimony that there is a microphone right above the head, and people in that room can hear what he says.
Yes, and then once they start, according to Kelly Kissel from the Associated Press, once they start to administer the drug, they turn that microphone off.
Yes.
So the witnesses cannot hear anything. You
Right.
can only see it, you cannot hear it. So
it's important to note, if it's okay, Donna, that Wendy Kelly was very direct in the courtroom that they are going to take their time.
Okay.
They are not going to rush this process. They do not want anything to go
I mean, because with the drug midazolam, I mean, there have been so many botched executions that we've talked about. In fact, Sean Murphy with the Associated Press, he's with the Associated Press in Oklahoma. He witnessed one of the botched executions that involved that particular drug. So, you know, I would think with the history, okay, all right. I'm being told that the ADC spokesperson, that would be Solomon Graves,
Sure.
he's sitting by the phone in the death room, so that would be in the death chamber. And it's 6:59 right
Sure.
now, so it's very close to the curtains
So according
opening.
to Wendy Kelly's testimony, those curtains should be opening as long as everything's going there. And we don't know exactly what's going inside that chamber.
That's
because
exactly right.
The death chamber specifically, because phones, electronics, they're not allowed.
Okay. It's 7 o'clock right now, and this process could be happening as we speak, this execution of a lethal injection, 3 drugs that will kill Ledell Lee. Kevin, we spoke earlier about protesters. I didn't think there were any protesters, but apparently there are. There are 2 of them.
Oh, at the Cummins unit,
There
I'm
are
sure.
2
Okay.
of them at the Cummins unit. I'm referring to what's going on here.
Yeah.
There are 2 of them here. They are the same ones that were here on Monday.
Interesting. Okay, well, they're making their voices heard.
Okay, execution has been delayed until 8:15 is what I'm being told now. So,
Yeah,
did you say 7:15 or 8:15?
No, it's been delayed. According to the Arkansas Department of Corrections spokesperson, Lee's execution is now on hold until 8:15 due to temporary stay at the 8th Circuit, which obviously is in St. Louis. So this has been pushed back for at least another hour and 15 minutes, 14 minutes if you want to be technical about it. But yeah, so that is what we're hearing now. And Donna, as you know, when I was out there on Monday, you know, 10 minutes away from the scheduled execution, that got called off at the last minute. And here we are at 7:01, and once again, we have another delay.
Hey, Kevin, hang on one second. A media witness just did what?
A media witness that was supposed to witness the execution just ran back into the media room, which means that media witness has left the death chamber.
Okay, yeah, and thank you for that information, and that's because this has been put on hold. You know, I want to talk to Marcy for a minute. Marcy, I tell you what, when it comes to the legality of...
I'm sorry, Donna, I'm not able to hear you at the moment.
She's not able to hear you.
Okay, she can't hear me.
I can relay it to her if you want.
Well, Kevin, you can relay it. Yeah,
that.
you can relay it. You know, when it comes to executions and the legalities, I mean, you just never know what's going to happen. We've been talking about, you know, 6:45 was when all of this was supposed to begin, and here it is, 7 o'clock, and just slightly after, 7:02. So 7:01, we learned that it's not going to happen, not yet anyway. So this is the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals that's now just looking at this case?
He's just talking about how the legalities and how these last-minute changes can have a profound impact on situation like this, as we've seen, and she's wondering, so now this latest development of this being pushed back to 8:15 because of an appeal filed that's now in the hands of the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals. Basically, your reaction to this and what it potentially could mean.
Well, right now, Ledell Lee has another hour to live. That's kind of obvious. We're trying to track down the full order or full opinion from the 8th Circuit on that. He was originally scheduled to be put to death at 8:15. ADC bumped his schedule up because Stacey Johnson received that stay, and we've kind of been saying throughout the day, and I've been watching the clock and hitting constant refresh on some of these cases, that this could happen up to the minute that he's set to be executed, and it appears, at least for a moment, that there is a reprieve without having seen that full order yet, to know which case and on what grounds it's been issued.
By the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, yeah, they
right.
issued the temporary
they would have
stay.
To, you would have to look at that and see on what grounds they have granted it and that sort of thing. So
why do you think it would come down so, like at the last second?
We have had a number of filings that have been coming in. I mean, all day we've been reporting that another decision filed, or another appeal filed, another lawsuit filed. And so it's not uncommon for these things to go down to the wire. Almost expected in some instances that if there is going to be a decision, these judges are reading through these orders from lower courts. They're considering whether they're going to overturn them. They're looking at the merits of each case, and some of these cases don't bring up the same issues. And so I don't know that anyone is not surprised, because we were sitting here watching the clock tick by, especially given ADC's processes. We start the IV team at 6:45. We open the curtains at 7. It's now 7:04, and he's been given a temporary stay until 8:15. And so it's something that we're going to have to watch for and see what exactly the court needs to make a permanent decision, or at least a decision at this point. Clearly, they're giving themselves a little more time to decide the cases and issue opinions in those.
Think about the frustrations, though, involved for especially for the victims' family members.
Absolutely.
Here. We're talking, decades of constantly waiting for the Arkansas Department and the state to carry out these executions, and here we are in the final hour, literally just seconds away from what was supposed to take place for Ledell Lee, and then poof, 8th Circuit Court of Appeals comes in and says, you know what, we're going to wait just another hour. I mean, the emotional toll this must be taking on them is hard to describe, if at all.
And you were down there on Monday, and so you kind of had a sense of that, I'm sure, of hearing things filtering out of the Cummins unit. Given where we are tonight, I would imagine, I can't actually, I'm not even going to try and imagine what's going through these families' minds.
It's just something that needs to be continued. I mean, that's a message that is also part of this big story.
Absolutely, there are victims
put
here.
Out there. Yeah.
I think that these attorneys are trying to exhaust every option that they have for their client. And in speaking with the attorneys for Ledell Lee, his claims of innocence, his attorney seemed to really feel that those had merit, and truly believed that the DNA testing would reveal something that hadn't been revealed before. And these attorneys, Lee's attorney in this case has been appointed. He's had some difficulties with appropriate counsel in the past, and so eventually Lee's attorney was actually appointed to him and has been handling this case. And any lawyer worth their salt, I think, will tell you that you do everything you can to put forth a representation as vigilantly as you can, as dedicated as it can be, and you don't give up, especially, I would say, for capital offense attorneys in death penalty cases, until the fight for them is over, to make sure that they have exhausted all of the due process rights, all of the legal options that their client has.
Yeah, very good points. Right now we want to check in with Charmaine Nero. She's out at the governor's mansion covering some of the protests that have been taking place. Have they caught yet, the protesters behind you, that Ledell Lee's execution is on hold at least until 8:15? And what is their reaction?
Kevin, as soon as I got here, they were standing in a circle, kind of gathering together to light candles and say a prayer for Ledell Lee. Now, they did get notice about 5 minutes after I got here, about 10 minutes ago, when it actually happened, that Ledell Lee would actually be it wouldn't happen until about 8:15. So they sent a message to all of the protesters you can see right now. There are about 40 of them. We actually moved farther back because they are in prayer right now, and they are just waiting around, sending out prayers, and still holding their signs and lighting the candle for Ledell Lee. Still a pretty impressive group here, about 40 people that have been here pretty much all day. They've been here for as long as I've been here, but like I said, right now they are in prayer. One of the women tell me that they will be praying up until 8:15, just sending out their prayers and thoughts. So that's pretty much what's happening here right now. Now I'm going to step back in the shot, and we're going to be out here all day just monitoring what's going on over here and seeing how they are reacting to all of the news that's coming forth.
All right, Charmaine, appreciate the update. Thank you very much. In the meantime, let's bring back in my co-anchor, Donna Terrell. She joins us live at the Cummins unit, where just a short time ago, it looked as if Ledell Lee was on schedule to be executed at 7 o'clock straight up. We are now 10 minutes after the hour, and we have just discovered that the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals in St. Louis has put the execution on hold, at least for another hour, and obviously the Arkansas Department of Correction catching wind of that immediately and taking the necessary precautions. Donna.
Yeah, you're right. And just looking at one of the emails that I got, the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals just wants more time to look at the case. So that's why they asked, and I think Marcy indicated that. The only thing that has changed out here since the last time you and I had a discussion is I've seen a number of media people just come out because obviously nothing is going on at this moment. So many of them have come back to their cars or their trucks, or to talk to their crews. I did ask one guy though, and I'm not sure what media outlet he was with, if he was able to see family members, if they got close enough, being that that we were imagining that this process was underway. Maybe it never was underway, but he said they didn't see anyone. So, and he just kind of kept walking. The parameters are sealed. Troopers still coming in and out. I was told that they don't really expect any major protests or anything. That's not why they're here, but they're always on guard just in case, because this is an execution, and you know how some people feel about executions. You have some people who are in favor and some people who are not, so you just want to make sure that you have all your bases covered. I mentioned before there are only 2 people here that are actually protesting, and they're off in a distant land from where I am. I can't see them from standing here, but they're the same 2 people. And one guy I remember from Monday, I asked him the question because his brother was executed for a murder, and he felt that there's really no closure. There's no closure when it comes to these executions. And even though he grieves for his brother and he feels for the family that was affected by his brother's actions, there is just no closure, is what he says. So that's what the protesters here, that's why they're here, because they just don't think this should happen. And we're waiting to see if it will happen, Kevin.
Very good point. All right, Donna, keep us posted. Great job out there. In the meantime, let us not forget about Deborah Reese, the 26-year-old that Ledell Lee killed in her Jacksonville home back in 1993. Now, prosecutors say Lee hit her 36 times with a tire thumper. Reese's son was only 6 years old at the time and says his loss still affects him every single day. Our very own Jesse Tenor, Fox 16's Jesse Tenor, breaks down the case.
My family has lived in the shadow of this event our entire lives.
In February 1993, 27-year-old Ledell Lee robbed, strangled, and raped 26-year-old Deborah Reese in her Jacksonville home. He then beat her 36 times with the same tire thumper her husband gave her for protection. Her son was only 6 years old.
My mother was everything to me.
24 years later, Joseph Lucky, now a grown man, whose loss still affects him every day.
When she was ripped from my life, it started a spiral that I almost didn't recover from.
Lee was sentenced to death 2 years after Reese's murder. Prosecutors say she wasn't his only victim. Lee committed violent crimes against 5 women, all involving rape in the Sunnyside area in Jacksonville, several ending with murder. His victims' ages ranged from 17 to 70.
He is the embodiment of the evil that should never have to exist in this world.
After 21 years on death row, Lee maintains his innocence. He and his attorney arguing he deserves post-conviction DNA testing.
He's not here to ask for forgiveness. He's not here because he's remorseful for a murder he didn't commit.
But time is running out for Lee. His execution date set for Thursday. His victim's son asking one thing: let it happen.
Let us have some closure. Let this end. Let us step out from this shadow.
Obviously very emotional, understandably why family members and friends of Deborah Reese are at the Cummins unit waiting patiently to see if, in fact, Ledell Lee will be put to death. That is on hold for the time being, at least for the next hour. His execution now scheduled for 8:15. It was scheduled for 7 p.m., but the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals now deciding it needs more time to review the case, so that is pushed back to 8:15. I want to bring back in my co-anchor Donna Terrell live at the Cummins unit. Obviously, we are in a holding pattern, but every second that flies by, there seems to be a tidbit of new information that is released.
Yeah, and this is really brief, but I'm trying to communicate with Jesse Tenure, and Stephanie Sharp is kind of helping me do that. We were wondering about the family, and I know earlier tonight you asked me, Kevin, about the family and what we knew. On Monday, Jesse was able to talk with Bruce Ward's family, and basically what happens is they're not in that room with the witnesses. They're actually watching it in a different room via television, via closed circuit feed. So, you know, we were wondering if they would actually be there with the other witnesses, but that's not the case at all, at least based on what Bruce Ward's victim's family said on Monday.
And that, I guess if you look at the big picture, Donna, in some respects, that might make sense to keep them kind of separate, if you will, considering the emotional toll that they must be experiencing. And in the same time, you've got media in there. You want to keep them away from the media out of respect, considering everything that's supposed to take place.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Now, the media, the electronic media, can't have cameras or anything like that. You cannot bring your phone, but they are given pad and pen so that they can write things down. And, of course, they could take notes that this is how the family reacted and that sort of thing. And you know, they need their privacy because they're grieving.
Yeah.
You know, they want to see this happen, but they're grieving the loss of their loved one and the brutal way that that person was killed. So you have to be sympathetic to them, and I guess that kind of explains how they maintain that. Yeah. Just looking around here again, now we have some of the guards from the prison, some of the prison guards, they're standing out there. We probably have another person from the media. I'm not sure who that guy is in the tie and jacket, but the other people, they do work here. So I'm going to send it back to you, Kevin, and I will cut back in if there's something of interest to talk about as we lead up to 8:15.
All right, Donna, thank you very much. In the meantime, I want to bring in Marcy Manley, who's been monitoring the situation very closely, latest developments with the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals.
Okay, so obviously we got that stay from the 8th Circuit on its own motion, but really I want to quickly go to Drew Petromu. I think we have some developments out of D.C. with the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court decision. And Drew, I have in hand what looks like a denial for stay of execution of sentences of death from the Supreme Court of the United States. Can you have been able to read through any of this, and do you have any additional information at this point?
Hey, Marcy. Yeah, I'm actually just looking on my phone right now. It came through for me as well. And, from what I can read, just going over it, all I see is denied, denied, going through more denied, denied. I mean, it looks like what the Supreme Court has done here is basically denied a request for a stay of execution, basically green lighting Arkansas to go forward with this execution if they conclude this other issue that is now before the appellate court. You had to think that once there was nothing that came down before that deadline, that basically meant that they weren't going to rule on the side of inmates, because what would be the point if they thought those executions were going to go forward to rule after? Obviously, that ruling from the appellate court came down right at the little bit after, actually, at least as far as what we were notified, after that deadline had already passed. But it doesn't look like on either of those cases, according to the way I read these orders from the U.S. Supreme Court, that they are not going to reconsider that original stay that was put in place by the federal judge in Arkansas, and not going to go after or take a look at that challenge that stemmed from that original lawsuit that was filed by inmates. So it looks like all eyes on the 8th Circuit at this point.
Like that is sort of the court at this point that is considering these other claims. We did have that late lawsuit that was filed by the ACLU on behalf of Ledell Lee. Is it surprising to you at all? I mean, on Monday night, we saw the Supreme Court say we're not going to step in and undo a stay of execution that was put in place by a state Supreme Court. And some might say this is equally predictable because there were multiple requests for stays of execution that went through the Arkansas Supreme Court, and also some that went through the 8th Circuit, and those have not been granted. Is this to be predicted, I guess, Drew? Is it to be expected?
Well, I mean, that's a tough one. Of course, it's a new court now. Neil Gorsuch, who is Donald Trump's nominee, taking his place on the bench this week. He is thought to be a more conservative judge. I think you probably wouldn't get much argument with that from anybody. And he has in the past made rulings that have been favorable to states trying to carry out lethal injections. I was just looking through and I saw that there were some dissents in the decisions that were made from some of the more liberal justices that pretty much always side with people that are trying to have their execution stayed because they fundamentally disagree with the death penalty. But this is obviously, depending on how you look at the death penalty issue, on Monday they made a ruling refusing to take up a case that was favorable to people that don't like the death penalty, or in this case didn't want to see the prisoners executed. But in the rulings that just came down, them citing that would be more favorable to the state. So we don't have a thorough explanation of how they reached the decisions, and we're not there to listen to them argue it out. But obviously a different outcome of the decisions based on what was just released compared to earlier in the week.
In that we're going to let the state guide its outcomes, whether that is execution moves forward or execution doesn't. So right now we're watching the clock. At first we were watching for 7 p.m. Now we're watching for 8:15. And that order was a little difficult to track down from the 8th Circuit because it made it on its own motion, creating a new number in PACER for it to rule under. So at this point, we're tracking a lot of movements, and the courts do what they do, and they make the decisions that they do at the times that they do when they realize when it comes down to the wire, essentially, when justice either requires more time or they've determined that the time has come to stop.
No way of knowing, but do you anticipate that the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals will come back within the next 45 minutes?
Your guess is as good as
Yeah,
I mean,
I know.
I would be lying if I tried to predict, and I think anyone who tries to predict would be lying in that instance. I think there were a number of people who were surprised when Stacey Johnson's stay was issued, when the stays were issued on Monday, and I would think there are going to be people who are very confident that Ledell Lee could prove his innocence that are going to be shocked if he doesn't get a stay. And so I think trying to predict the courts is a gamble that I don't want to take.
I just find it interesting that they put an 8:15 timeline on that, on hold until 8:15. It makes me wonder why 8:15 and why not just let it run its course up until the time the death certificate expires, which is at midnight. Yeah.
Doesn't have a reason in there.
I know. It doesn't have a reason. All right. We want to check back in with Charmaine Nero. She joins us live outside the governor's mansion where protesters have gathered. I understand you have a protester there with you at this particular hour.
Exactly, Kevin. I actually have Reverend Carolyn here, and she's with the Arkansas Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty. So tell me a little bit about, the crowd out here, the turnout. What are you guys here for?
Well, we just believe that there are alternatives to the death penalty, and that the death penalty does not represent what we believe or the direction that we believe our state should be taking. That we care very deeply for the victims' families. We care for their memories. We have many victims' family members who are with us, and they say that this does not, an execution does nothing to alleviate their pain and loss. So there'll still be a hole there. And as I'm a Christian, I'm a pastor, I've looked at this for as long as I can remember, and I can't find any place where Jesus ever recommended killing anyone. In fact, he stepped in to keep a woman from being killed by the authorities. And so I really believe that this is the wrong direction to go, and that it just makes all of us complicit, and I, for one, am not complicit in this murder.
And I know that there was a prayer ceremony here earlier,
Yes.
Reverend Sally, and you said that everybody here was, kind of not excited, but the emotion here was that 8:15 it was pushed back. What was the emotion coming from you guys, what you saw?
I think it was just an hour of hope. It's not very long, but it's long enough for wise judges to look at the evidence, to consider the arguments, and we hope will give them more time to decide to not go ahead with this execution tonight of Ledell Lee.
And you tell me that you guys are going to be out here pretty much for the rest of the night, as long as you guys can be out here. So we're going to wrap it up now and send it back to you guys in the studio. But we'll continue giving you coverage of the people that are out here and just letting you know what they're thinking about all of this as it happens.
All right, Charmaine, thank you very much. And of course, there are others throughout the state of Arkansas who support the death penalty and lethal injection. In fact, a large majority of the people here in the state of Arkansas, just to be fair. So we have to present that side of the story as well.
We did have, a group of prosecuting attorneys. They're all meeting in Hot Springs today, and they issued a fervent statement. These are the people who work to...
like 28 signatures, give or take? Yeah.
And we do have media witnesses, didn't get out of the truck, told at 8:15 Lee's stay will be extended or expire, then nothing stands in the way of execution. So that makes sense. Either they will sit and wait until 8:15, or they'll be allowed to go in if the stay is lifted, or another one it's not extended. And if it is extended, I would imagine they remain and wait until that point in time.
Yeah, which is kind of the scenario that unfolded Monday night in the case of Don Davis, who was not executed.
And it certainly went much closer down to the wire. And we still didn't have a decision from the Supreme Court of the United States until roughly 11:35, 11:40.
It came in at around 11:45, 11:50. We were on the air covering this, waiting for that decision to come down. And at the very final minute, it came down. But we were just 10 minutes away from starting that execution.
Right.
or potentially ending it, which ended up being the case.
Right.
But yeah, and here we are tonight in the case of Ledell Lee. He was scheduled to be executed at 7 p.m., but literally like at around 7:02, we caught wind that it was put on hold by the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals. So that's where we are right now. We are waiting. In the meantime, let's check back in with Fox 16's Donna Terrell. She is at the Cummins unit in Lincoln County where this is all unfolding, but like we have been throughout the remainder of these other scheduled executions, at least up to this point, we are in a holding pattern once again.
Yeah, we are in a holding pattern, but you might want to talk to Marcy about this, and certainly she must have seen it. The U.S. Supreme Court has denied the inmate's request for stay of execution. This is Stacey Johnson versus Kelly, Director, Arkansas DLC. So she might want to brief us on that, because it sounds like Stacey Johnson could potentially be executed tonight. He is inside Cummins' unit. He's been waiting there.
And Marcy, right?
You know what? I apologize. Let me just explain something here. I cannot hear Drew. So if they were discussing that, and this was just handed to me, so I can't hear all of it, everything that's going on. So
no, Donna, and I mean, it's important to touch on again. I mean, the Supreme Court of the United States, they opted not to step in on Monday to relieve or pull away a stay of execution that the state had put in. And this time they're saying in a close decision, 5-4 on the stay of execution issue, which Drew can talk about on close votes. He's watched plenty of them, and the Supreme Court is its own interesting entity. But a 5-4 decision is very close. It means it was a close call by the justices. I think Drew would agree with that, but it doesn't necessarily help these inmates at this point when they're requesting these stays of execution, because this didn't only apply to Ledell Lee, but also some of the others. And Drew, any reaction in the D.C. crowd to the U.S. Supreme Court's decision on this, and are you hearing any vibes or anything out there? I know a lot of people have been watching to see what happens in Arkansas with all this.
Yeah, they have, and I've been speaking with some of the experts here, some of the George Washington and Georgetown universities, and they're all watching this very closely just to see how it's happening, because I think what really caught a lot of people's attention here was the rate of the executions when they first were announced, 8 and 11 days. Of course, that is not going to happen because of what happened on Monday, and then there's been some other rulings preventing at least one of the other executions at this point for moving forward. So that kind of got this on everyone's attention, and then there's also a lot of interest to see exactly how this new court is going to view this issue with Neil Gorsuch now taking his place on the bench. But there's been a lot of people watching Arkansas, a lot of eyes on Arkansas from here in Washington. Of course, the people in Congress, senators and congressmen, are back in district, or not here. But I know that we've heard throughout this debate, as people kind of argued what Arkansas was doing, from people like Senator Tom Cotton, who want to see these sentences carried out. So obviously stuff like this can become a political issue, and it has a lot of people here in Washington who follow the death penalty very closely with their eyes turned on Arkansas, not just over the last several weeks, but specifically tonight.
Just to be clear, it can get kind of messy because you have state decisions that are happening, you have federal decisions that are happening, and then at some point those two can converge with a state issue moving up to the U.S. Supreme Court, which is something that happened with Davis when they asked for the U.S. Supreme Court to remove his stay of execution that the Arkansas Supreme Court had put in. But at this point, this decision by the U.S. Supreme Court doesn't affect his stay, that is Stacey Johnson's stay that was issued by the Arkansas Supreme Court, right, Drew?
Right. No. This is different than that. So, yeah, like I said, that is not happening tonight. We're talking about one execution set for tonight. But I think the point I was making is that the 8 executions in 11 days that first got everyone's attention is not exactly going forward like that at this point. But that hasn't changed the amount of attention that these Arkansas cases are still getting here in Washington.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And I imagine that there's quite a bit of discussion. I saw a decision out of Texas, or preparations for some decision and debate over how it imports its death penalty drugs. And that seems to be a big contention here of this interaction between what these states have to do to get these protocols in place so that they're deemed constitutional, and then trying to access those drugs in a global economy where you have drug companies that are trying to operate in the EU, which doesn't allow for drug companies to use drugs in that way. And so I can imagine that that's a big portion of what people are watching for and looking at, is this contention of, is the death penalty becoming harder to carry out in the United States?
It certainly gives some people that indication, especially when you look at other states where executions are carried out and there's not a whole lot of rumbling over the protocols that have been put in place or the drugs that have been used and how they obtained them. And then all of a sudden Arkansas now is thrust into the spotlight because of how we obtained the drugs and the secrecy laws that are involved, and then obviously all of that litigation playing out over the midazolam, the vecuronium bromide, and so forth. And then 8 and 11 days. That's going to put anybody in the spotlight.
And clearly Arkansas isn't alone. There was a Sixth Circuit decision that came down regarding the death penalty just a few days ago. These are highly contested and highly litigated issues, and some would say they should be, because you are taking the life of a person. They committed heinous crimes and were convicted of heinous crimes, but from a state-sanctioned process, you want to make sure that you're following the law and the Constitution and those type of things. From a legal perspective, that would be the argument. And so I doubt Arkansas will be the only state that faces these challenges and these questions, especially as pressures, either political or economic or just PR, make it more difficult for them to acquire these drugs from these drug companies.
Yeah, and you wonder, and you hope, depending on where you sit on lethal injection, that when and if the green light is issued, that this will be the first time the state of Arkansas has used the drug midazolam, and there's no room for error. You mentioned the PR factor in all of this. As we talked about, yes, this is getting national and worldwide attention, considering how many inmates were scheduled to be executed between now and the end of the month. But when and if an inmate is executed, the state has just got to be hoping that all the procedures have been followed through and that it will be a smooth process, but we will have to wait and see how that unfolds.
Yeah.
Right now we want to check back in with Donna Terrell live at the Cummins unit in Lincoln County. Donna, what's the latest there?
Well, I just got information to clarify some things with Ledell Lee. He was on his way to the execution chamber right as the stay was being announced by the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals. So he never made it to the execution chamber. We were wondering about that earlier because we thought, well, maybe he had already been strapped on the gurney, but that was not the case. So they took him back to the holding cell, and the state troopers that are out here tonight, a state trooper and jail guards, will be escorting him back to the execution chamber, certainly dependent on what the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals ends up deciding tonight. I want to talk to Stephanie a little bit because she and I have been going back and forth, and we've been trying to communicate with Jessie Tenure. Jessie is actually in the media room inside Cummins. She has access to a little bit more than we do standing out here in this parking lot. So what kind of information has she given you? I know she tweeted, and she also sent you some messages.
Yeah, just to kind of explain how this flow of information is going. So Jessie's inside, she's inside the media room. She has a laptop and a hotspot with her, so she's able to tweet out information. She's also in there with the public information officer for the Department of Correction, and he's giving updates just as the night goes. So she's tweeting to us about what's going on, so of course we can relay the information back to you. We have mentioned earlier that, we've seen the media witnesses outside after the first, we believed at 7 o'clock when the first execution was going to happen before this Court of Appeals decision. However, she said that the media witnesses didn't even get outside of the truck. They were taken in a van to this death chamber area. They didn't even get outside of the truck, and they were told either that they would go in at 8:15 if nothing happens, or this stay could possibly be extended. So we've seen some of the media witnesses come in and out to their respective areas in this parking lot. So that's one of the things. Jesse actually just tweeted one more thing. So yeah, she's just, yeah, she was saying that they haven't really been told that, like you just reported a few minutes ago, that Ledell Lee was on his way to the death chamber whenever that legal decision was announced earlier. She didn't hear that from inside.
Well, we got that from a state trooper. In fact, Mitch McCoy got that from a state trooper on the outside. So we credit that information with one of the state troopers that's just giving us some tidbits here and there. Yeah, and Kevin, you were here on Monday, so certainly you know when you're out here, you really rely on the people who are inside to feed you information. They're dependent, Jesse Tenure in this case, dependent on Solomon Graves, who's the spokesperson for the Arkansas Department of Correction, to give her information, and sometimes it doesn't happen quickly. So not only are we in a holding pattern, but we're also waiting for more information. One of the things we do know, as we've already reported, is the decision that the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals made, which is why Ledell Lee is not in the death chamber. As I said before, he was on his way, and before he got there, he never actually made it. That's when the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals stepped in. Kevin?
Yeah, we are 35 minutes away from that 8:15. I don't want to call it, well, 8:15 was when execution is scheduled to take place, and so we're 35 minutes away from that taking place. But as we have found out, not only on Monday, but as well as tonight, anything can change. Donna, you kind of mentioned the environment there at the Cummins unit. Me having been there on Monday, you there tonight, but just standing where you are, which was the same place I was on Monday, for the average person, you would have no idea that an execution was scheduled to be taking place, at least from your vantage point, because all of the action is going on behind you in a building that very few people have access to.
Yeah, not even the witnesses right now have access to the building or to the death chamber area, the witness room. So you're right. You're just in this parking lot with other media people who are, you know, just waiting to get some information. We do have some state troopers out here, though, and just a couple of them, to be honest with you. It's not like we have a lot of state troopers. It's just 2 of them, and they just keep walking back and forth, and sometimes you can get one of them to give you a little bit of information, but they don't know a whole lot either. It's just one of those things where we're relying on social media. I have Stephanie on this side. I have Mitch McCoy over on the other side. They're both on their phones. They're monitoring everything. Jesse Tenure is trying to give us as much information as humanly possible under the circumstances, so that we know what's going on, so that we are able to report to our followers, so that they understand this whole process.
All right, Donna, take a little bit of a breather if you can. I know there's developments going on inside. Continue to monitor social media like we are back here at the studio. I want to bring back in Marcy Manley just to kind of, if you're just joining us, to kind of bring us up to speed on where we are with the legal aspect of this. I mean, as we mentioned earlier, Ledell Lee was scheduled to be executed at 7 p.m. It looked as if that was going to happen, but then like literally a minute or two after 7 p.m., boom. Another legal challenge.
I wonder if it felt like a minute or two after 7 p.m. for some, because they're anxiously awaiting this, either anticipating it after decades of waiting for it to happen, or anxiously awaiting and hoping it doesn't. So time, I imagine, either is slowing down or speeding up, depending on which side of this issue that you're on. But the 8th Circuit did come in. We had some last-minute filings into the federal court system, making constitutional claims about the law, about DNA testing. And so at this point, the 8th Circuit decided it needed more time to decide these cases. Ledell Lee was originally scheduled to be executed at 8:15. So it's interesting that the court chose that to be the time at which it would make a decision or extend the stay. And so that's sort of the line of demarcation at this point. We don't know what's going to happen in the next 30 minutes or so. They could extend the stay, as Jesse's tweet reflected from ADC officials, or they could lift the stay and deny the request, and he moves forward with the planned execution.
Let me ask you this real quick, and this is for the benefit of our viewers out there. You mentioned that the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals filed this appeal or stay because it needed more time to review the cases. So are we talking about other inmates that are on death row as well, or are we just specifically talking about Ledell Lee, because he's filed a number of appeals?
One of the two cases involves Lee v. Hutchinson, and it is Lee et al. And so that would theoretically perhaps affect other inmates, but there is the other one that deals with the DNA testing, and so it would remain to be seen. It's hard to predict what the outcomes are, and so could deny, the motion on the one hand and grant the other. It's just very hard to predict. I don't think anyone predicted a 702, us getting word of a 702 order to stay at that point. We were all kind of watching the clock tick down, especially knowing the ADC protocols and plans that Mitch McCoy shared with us. So it seemed like it was well past time for that to have come. But we saw on Monday night that decisions come as late as, 10 minutes before the execution warrant expires.
And real briefly, the possible scenarios as a result of this. What could we potentially be looking at?
Well, if you have a decision from the Eighth Circuit, a decision from the Eighth Circuit can then again be appealed up to the United States Supreme Court. We did have some very close calls on these denials of writ of cert and stay of execution in the three orders before. I don't know that you would anticipate a different outcome, but maybe. I would certainly anticipate that someone would try. But that's sort of where that can go. And then, obviously, if they deny the motion, then Ledell Lee's case might just move forward in execution. But I would anticipate a try at an appeal there.
Okay, well, it is still unfolding, even as we speak. Of course, we're monitoring it very closely for you. I want to go back out to Donna Terrell at the Cummins unit in Lincoln. She can kind of put some perspective on this. Donna, I know you've been out there since early this afternoon, right around 1 o'clock is when you got there. But kind of walk us through what it has been like since you've been there, the mood, the atmosphere, and then, of course, all of these legal challenges leading up to 7:45, where we're just 30 minutes away from the 8:15 tentative execution.
Okay, well, when we first got here, we weren't allowed on the grounds. We had to park our car outside of the Cummins area, if you will, because they wanted us to wait. And at that time, we were under the impression that there was that temporary restraining order, and not under the impression, we knew that there was a temporary restraining order for one of the drugs. So that would have halted all executions in the state of Arkansas. Then it wasn't long after that we discovered they had lifted that temporary restraining order. By that time, we were actually in the parking lot and getting set up. I think by then we kind of had a sense that it's likely that there will be an execution tonight. Certainly, Ledell Lee, he had a number of legal challenges out there. They were all coming back, and they were coming back not in favor of him. So, we were just kind of getting through all of that. I want to bring in my colleague, Bob Clausen. Bob, you and I both have been trying to get as much information as we possibly can. It's a little difficult when you're in the parking lot. I was really under the impression that once we got here, the information would come more freely, but it doesn't really.
And if you think, a bulk of the information is right there. And
inside.
It's difficult to get it out here. I think a lot of that has to do with policy and procedure inside Department of Corrections. And when it comes to an execution, those things are just, there are priorities.
Exactly.
Information to us is not necessarily a priority, but they do what they can. But they've got other things to deal with. One, as we've seen, is monitoring just about every court there is outside prison grounds and, of course, outside the state.
Right.
That played out tonight.
That definitely played out tonight. It will be interesting to see what happens with the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, what their decision will be, because that could change everything tonight. They could come back with a stay of execution or just the opposite.
Well, I think, and I'm not sure if Marcy addressed this too, but if the 8th Circuit kicks it back, well, I think that automatically sets up a toss to the U.S. Supreme Court. I'm not sure. We can talk to Marcy in a minute and see that.
Yeah.
And then we either wait on that until the death warrant expires at midnight, or they come up with a decision. Again, I'm not sure how that plays out, but anything can happen in cases like this. I remember there was one execution, Kurt Wainwright. This was several years ago. He was brought into the death chamber. The IVs were placed in his arm, and within, I would say, minutes of them injecting him with the drugs, a call came from the U.S. Supreme Court that Clarence Thomas wanted to review the case. And the specifics in reviewing that case was the fact that Wainwright had argued that then Governor Mike Huckabee was an acquaintance to his victims, and he showed bias in not granting him clemency. Justice Thomas wanted to review that, take a very close look at that, and see what actually happened. Kurt Wainwright wound up laying on that table for about an hour.
So he actually was in the chamber.
He was in the chamber, he was on the table, and he had the IVs,
Unlike Ledell Lee, who never made it to the
Right.
chamber before the 8th Circuit intervened. So,
and that's when it can happen. And then ultimately, Clarence Thomas said there was no bias, and the execution was
execution
carried through.
happened.
But that shows you just exactly how, I guess, how down to the wire. If I use that,
well, it was
that
down to the
phrase
wire on Monday. So that could happen tonight.
I think there has to be, from an observation, from an observer's point of view, everything is being looked at here. Every court is giving this everything they possibly can to make sure that everything has been done procedurally, whether you're claiming innocence or not, or you're claiming, poor legal counsel, or you're claiming some injustice because of the system. Everything is being taken. Everything is being taken a look.
Yes.
So.
All right. Well, we're going to send it back to the studio. Ashley Ketz is actually sitting in the anchor chair right now. Ashley.
Hey, Ashley.
All right, guys, thanks very much for that update from Cummins tonight. We're hearing from Jessie Tenor. She's actually inside the building behind Bob and Donna right now. She has just learned from the ADC that Lee was never moved into the death chamber. So that's something we want to clarify in all of this, that he was never moved to the death chamber. An IV was never administered or started. He was never put on the gurney, strapped down. None of that has happened as we were leading up to 7 o'clock. Then we get that ruling that came down, Marcy, from the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals right about 7, maybe a minute or two after, really, is when we got that. So this has come down to the wire, kind of like it did the other night as we were heading toward the midnight hour. Now we have this 8:15 deadline where they're looking into everything. What are they considering right now? What do they need the more time for? Because it sounds like we don't really have an answer as to what exactly they could be looking at, because they said inmates, plural, and we're looking at the possible execution of one inmate tonight.
Well, and I mean, I've got the order in front of me, so I can tell you on the court's own motion, it is hereby ordered that the execution of Ledell Lee is temporarily stayed until 8:15 to permit the court to consider the motion for stay of execution and the response pending before it. So, considering the motion for stay of execution, and then we've heard from individuals that there are 2 cases pending right now with the 8th Circuit that have motions for stay of execution attached to those. So we'll just have to wait and see. It's difficult to predict what they're taking into account here, and we're trying to determine what the outcomes could be and what the process is then. And so, and it might be worth talking to Drew about sort of the processes that he's seen play out with the U.S. Supreme Court interaction here with the Arkansas Supreme Court, the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals. Drew, what's your take?
Well, you're almost certainly going to get a appeal from whatever happens with the 8th Circuit Court, and so that means that however they rule, it likely will not be decided at the time that we're waiting for now, which is 8:15, because there will be an emergency request for an appeal. You'll have to wait and see from there what happens with the Supreme Court. I do know one of the things, I've been talking to some experts here about how this plays out. The interesting thing about the Supreme Court is you actually need 5 votes on the Supreme Court to stay in execution. You only need 4 votes for them to take up a case. So if there are no stays in place, the execution goes forward. So even if there are enough votes to among members of the Supreme Court to take on a case and consider it, if there's not 5 votes to stop the execution can go forward with some issues still pending, and that's not something that's unprecedented. There was an execution recently, I think a few years back, that went forward despite pending legal actions. Sometimes I was learning more recently about sometimes when you only have 4 votes that want to issue a stay, but one of the other members of the Supreme Court will actually join in that stay, even if they only agree that there should be a hearing on the case, just to prevent an execution from going forward and thus kind of leaving the case moot. So a lot of things going on if and when it does get to the Supreme Court level, but as you guys have been saying, right now we are waiting for the 8th Circuit Court.
Out, Drew, that it takes 4 justices to take up a case, 5 for a stay of execution, and we really saw that play out in these orders. You had 4 dissenting saying stay of execution I would grant, and then the 5 on the other side saying no. And so you had theoretically enough on a stay of execution if it were the same for taking up a case, but that higher bar, that higher threshold left these inmates wanting, if you will.
Sure. And another thing to consider, the first 2 cases from Monday that didn't go forward because of this hearing that's going to be happening next week. Actually, on Monday, there's a case from Alabama that has to do with an outside mental expert examination during trial and whether or not condemned inmates are entitled to that during the trial process. That's what stopped those 2 executions on Monday, and that hearing is going to take place on Tuesday. So another big death penalty issue that the U.S. Supreme Court is taking up. Now, there have been some efforts to kind of piggyback on that by some of the inmates that were scheduled to be executed tonight. So, that's another issue to consider here because there's this big hearing coming up on Monday.
Mm-hmm. And here we are about 21 minutes away from 8:15 right now. So we're waiting and watching just as we were the other night. Drew, thanks for that insight there. We want to show you a live picture of the Cummins unit in Lincoln County where all eyes around the state are watching right now, not just here in Arkansas, but really all across the country. We've seen lots of national media, even international reporters who have come to Arkansas. They've been covering this for weeks now just to see how this will all play out, because there was an 11-day span that the governor set that there would be 8 men originally executed in an 11-day span here in the month of April. Well, right now we still haven't seen any of those sentences carried out. So we also want to talk about the crimes that these men committed, and many of them more than 20 years ago. I believe we have some footage to show you, and also from to give you just some background on Ledell Lee, the one inmate that we are looking at tonight here. He was set to be executed at 7 o'clock. Here we are, 7:55 now. Still waiting to hear from the appellate court whether or not this stay will be lifted. You see there on your screen, he was convicted of the murder, the strangulation of Deborah Reese. That happened right here in Pulaski County. This was back in 1993. He was then convicted of capital murder 2 years later and sentenced to death by lethal injection. We know that some of Reese's family is at the Cummins unit right now. They are waiting to hear what will happen as well. This is something they have been waiting on for more than 20 years now. And my co-anchor Bob Clausen is live outside. He's covered several of these executions in the past here in Arkansas. And Bob, have any of them gone down to the wire like what we're seeing right now?
I can't recall anyone that has gone down to the wire and then the wire has been lifted, so to speak, and things begin to proceed, and then all of a sudden things get shut down again. There have been a few that have been tricky that have been bounced up the Supreme Court. The one, Kurt Wainwright, that I'd recently mentioned, and there have been a couple other ones that the multiple executions where there was a lot of review before those things went forward. So it does go to show you on one side that everything is looked at. One thing I found interesting, and I wanted to ask Drew this, maybe he knows, or perhaps Marcy, why 8:15? I mean, can they put an actual deadline on when they're going to review and then stop reviewing a case, and then where does it go from there? Or do they get to the point where they say, hey, it's 8:14, we got to hurry up and make a decision on this? Which I just found that to be surprising.
No, yeah, and I think
rather than just
an
open review. And
no, Bob, I think a lot of people are surprised at how autonomous these courts can be, and they can make those decisions for themselves. And at that point, maybe they were giving themselves an hour. 8:15 was the time that Ledell Lee, and this is all speculation. Obviously, we haven't been able to talk to the Eighth Circuit, but they were scheduled. They had scheduled Ledell Lee originally at 8:15. That gives them an hour to review. How much review a person might be able to do of these issues in an hour, you might ask, remains to be seen. But that hour might give them time to know that they need more time. But according to ADC, there are two options here. The stay could be extended for however long the court deems it needs to be, or it could fail to extend it, or choose not to extend it, or make a decision that it denies these requests from Ledell Lee. So those are the options. And you raised the question, and I realized I wasn't sure because we haven't really had this play out quite this way. And so was asking the AG's office what happens if a stay isn't put in. And I'm sorry, Bob,
we're getting some new information.
Yeah.
We just want to make sure we have the most up-to-date information. But what she was trying to say, talking about it will either be extended past 8:15. Again, that the death warrant for Ledell Lee expires tonight at midnight, or it could just expire. Nothing would then stand in the way of him being killed by lethal injection by the state. So
we are getting some information about additional stays, applications for stays of execution based on pending actions. And so with these ongoing actions, he's asking for a stay of execution.
Just a blizzard of activity.
Yeah. It really is, and it's down to the wire. I mean, and I think the clock was ticking in Monday nights, but right now he's in there. He is set to go. And so you have to, as Kevin and I were talking about, you have to do whatever you can to go through the process and try to represent your client as best you can.
And right now we are nearing in on the 8 o'clock hour, 15 minutes away from when we expect to know where to go from there.
Right.
So let's say the green light is given for an execution to start. There are a lot of protocols that have to be followed. Those have been reviewed by the workers there at ADC for weeks, if not months now. The state of Arkansas has had a long time to iron all of these out to hopefully ensure a smooth process for everyone involved. Kevin Kelly now breaks down that protocol for us.
According to the state's lethal injection procedure, the executioner will enter the chamber prior to the inmate's scheduled time of execution. They will inspect what's called the injection drug box, ensuring all chemicals are accounted for. The gurney will be positioned so the deputy director and executioner can directly see the inmate's face and IV infusion site. At that point, the condemned inmate will be brought in and strapped down. The IV team, who are licensed and have at least 2 years' experience, will then insert 2 IV bags containing normal saline. When the flow is secure and safe, the warden will give the green light. The IV team will first administer 2 syringes containing 250 milligrams of midazolam, a sedative that is supposed to make the inmate unconscious. If the inmate is not unconscious, backup syringes of midazolam and saline will be given in a secondary infusion site. There will then be a 5-minute waiting period, at which point the deputy director will confirm the inmate is in fact unconscious. Once that is determined, the second drug will be administered. 2 syringes containing 50 milligrams of vecuronium bromide, a paralytic. Then comes the third and final drug. 2 syringes of 120 milliequivalents of potassium chloride will begin to flow, ultimately causing the inmate's heart to stop.
That was Kevin Kelly there breaking down everything. If it does go according to plan, that's what will happen. But let's say there is a problem, whether it be with the IV, the infusion site, possibly a collapsed vein. We've seen this happen in other states. The deputy director will then immediately reduce the chemical flow. The curtains will be drawn, and then the IV team will hopefully fix that problem. Once that happens, the curtain will be reopened and the execution will continue. The protocol procedure, however, does not say what will happen if the problem can't be fixed. And we want to switch gears now as we are nearing 8:15. It's 8:02 right now, and people are outside of the governor's mansion here in Little Rock protesting the death penalty. Charmaine, what are these folks saying? A lot of them were calling this an hour of hope.
Exactly. Now we are still here. The same crowd is still out here. They say they're going to stay as long as it takes. I'm actually here with Ferranda Brasfield, and the emotions here. I know that everybody is just waiting. It's less than 15 minutes till we get any word. So what's kind of the emotion here right now?
Sure, there are so many emotions here.
People are hopeful. People are very disappointed in our governor and our attorney general and our criminal justice system. We are prayerful. We are here to hold vigil for Mr. Ledell Lee, and we hope that the Eighth Circuit will rule in favor of keeping this man alive, and at the very least allowing the evidence of his possible innocence to be tested.
And what are your hopes? I know that we're counting down now. The clock is ticking. What are your hopes within the next couple of minutes? What do you hope?
In the next few minutes, I hope that the Eighth Circuit Court will rule that at the very least, Ledell Lee's his innocence claims can be explored. We definitely don't want to execute, and if we don't want to execute anybody, but we definitely don't want to execute a man that is innocent. So if he is innocent, I think that it makes all the sense in the world to explore those innocence claims and to make absolute sure, because once we execute Ledell Lee, there is no bringing him back.
Thank you so much for that. Like I said, they said they're going to be out here for the remainder of the night, waiting on any new detail that comes. So we're going to be out here with them, just keeping you updated on how they are reacting to the news, as everybody else is. Going to send it back to you in the studio now.
We're here as long as it takes.
All right, Charmaine, thanks very much. We are about 11 minutes or so away from 8:15. That's when we either know this will be extended or possibly this temporary stay will expire. And then at that point, it appears nothing at this point will stand in the way of his execution tonight. And Marcy, you're getting some last minute filings and responses to some of these.
Yes, so we had several denials of stay requests from the Arkansas Supreme Court when it comes to Ledell Lee. And when you get those denials from the Arkansas Supreme Court, you can then request, in light of that, a stay from the U.S. Supreme Court. We had a couple of answers previously on some applications, and now I just want to show you the type of material that is being filed, and these are just partial documents that we're getting in a little more quickly than it's coming up on Pacer. So at this point, he is filing for stays of execution from the Supreme Court of the United States and also writ of cert. And Drew and I talked a little bit about that, what the standards are for that, and how you go about that. So,
and earlier in the week, just yesterday, his post-conviction DNA testing was denied.
Right.
And that was a big part of this whole puzzle.
Absolutely, and it sort of led to the appeals to the Arkansas Supreme Court, and I think we have Drew here at this point. So Drew, these were just filed. You're going to have a little more work to do on monitoring up at the U.S. Supreme Court because our options are his options are relatively run out here in the state. Surprised that he appealed on these and filed for these applications?
Well, yeah, and especially after the time that he was already scheduled to be put to death. So you can imagine what's going on in the team of lawyers that are working on these cases, and maybe seeing an opening here now that they had this hour and 15 minutes to continue filing motions, and now filing this before the Supreme Court. And basically what they're asking for is more time for this execution to be stayed. They say that there are some new methods of DNA testing that they can use to test some blood on the shoes that were found at the scene, and also there's a hair that was found there at the scene. But obviously this is very last minute, and as we were talking about earlier, if there's not a stay in place, even if all these filings are still being filed, and that there are issues still being brought up, the key here is a stay. If there's no stay, it goes forward even with legal motions in place. And from what we've seen so far from the Supreme Court, is it appeared that they were not ready to step in. Now we have more last minute filings, and the question is, will the Supreme Court take a different track and really insert itself in a way that we didn't see earlier?
And one thing, in talking to the Attorney General's office, because that was a question that Bob Clausen raised, was what if they don't extend it, and what if we don't have a decision, or what if they deny it? Then what happens? Do we have this outstanding legal process going on, and the execution moves forward anyway for lack of a stay? And in talking to the Attorney General's office, because that is a kind of odd scenario that can play out, there are really it's really up to the governor's discretion. If there's not a stay in place, or the Eighth Circuit has denied, that would give an opportunity for an appeal up to the Supreme Court. But without a stay in place, then there's nothing barring the execution aside from the governor's discretion, according to the Attorney General's office. There is another option that can occur where the Supreme Court can come in and give a temporary stay to give the parties the opportunity to file sort of a motion of its own motion. It can come in and put a temporary stay in place to give them time to file the cert or file for a stay of execution, and then allow that time for that process to be carried out. So hard to predict on that point. And just one clarification, some people were asking, can we define what writ of cert means?
Right.
It's asking for the U.S. Supreme Court to sort of intervene and take up this case as for jurisdiction. Bob, what is the feeling out there? Any rumblings? I mean, we're 7 minutes away from 8:15, and just wondering what it feels like out there for you.
I tell you what, just to show you how you can't predict these things. Generally, when you were inside the press room, the media room there, and the ADC spokesperson sat down next to that hardline telephone, you knew that was the call for places, everyone. We're getting underway. In fact, I tweeted that once I heard that, because in the past, that's what happened. Immediately, we found out, well, things have just stopped. So you can't really predict what's going on. But when you talk about what's happening right now, the silence is deafening. Stephanie Sharp joining me now. She was just inside the media room. And generally, there's somewhat of a flurry of activity in there. People are either putting copy together, they're bringing in new information, or new information is being handed along to them. But nothing, huh?
Yeah, we've been monitoring social media this entire time, constantly updating our phones, updating Twitter to try to get some sort of information. However, we have a reporter, Jesse Tenor, and Mitch McCoy inside, and we haven't heard anything from them. They haven't gotten any updates from the spokesperson of ADC. So at this point in time, we're just really kind of waiting. This was a waiting game on Monday, and again, it's a waiting game today. It's 8:10. That stay was supposed to be until 8:15. Now you have these new legal hurdles to jump through. So as we just wait for information out here, I know them inside are waiting for information there. Kind of how the flow of information works is, they're with the spokesperson of ADC. As soon as that spokesperson says something, they have a laptop and a hotspot, and they can tweet it out to us. And then we, of course, can get it to you guys. But at this point in time,
slow
we haven't
moving.
heard anything from in there.
One thing too we're talking about some of the witnesses and what they're going to be employed to do. And midazolam, which is the drug much talked about, that is almost on display tonight as well, should the execution go through, because there are a number of things that these witnesses will be looking for. And that's, of course, going to be the reaction that the inmate has once that drug is administered, and then the following drug. So that's going to be something, and I think that whether or not that's falling into play, or if that's on the minds of some of these courts or some of the clerks that are taking in some of these filings, that's said, who knows at this point.
Yeah, and one thing that I did want to mention too, is something different from today than from Monday, is that the media witnesses were selected earlier today, and they were given a pen and piece of paper. On Monday, the media witnesses were also selected, and as you remember, the executions didn't go through. However, those media witnesses weren't given that pen and piece of paper. So this time around, they're able to take notes on what exactly happens inside that death chamber. And of course, that is if we get to that point tonight, because it's still up in the air.
Because I don't know that anyone is, I don't know that the media witnesses or the witnesses have even been moved into that area yet, which is, I think there are several layers between us and the death chamber. So it takes its process of getting there and then getting them into position. And earlier we learned too that the family and the other witnesses, the volunteers, will be brought in. And then once they're seated and everything settles down, then the media witnesses are brought in. And that's an attempt to, not that anybody in the media would overstep the bounds, but that's an attempt to keep the media away from those witnesses and the family, let them have their time and not have us ask them questions, things like that, or even invade their personal space. But the pen and paper is key, because that's a lot of what these folks are seeing. They're seeing it for the first time, and it is pretty enormous. The magnitude of it is giant. So you're going to want to record as much as you possibly can on paper as you're taking it in.
Yeah, so like on Monday, if they didn't have that pen and paper, they would have to just remember it by memory. And this time they're able to write down exactly what happens to transcribe it later, so you can get a more detailed feel of what exactly happened in there. So of course it's very important to have those media witnesses inside that death chamber, as well as if that happens tonight, which is still up in the air.
Checking the time, I think we're approaching 8:15, which is that deadline, and not sure if anything's crossed Twitter just yet. That's been an invaluable tool, because then we're waiting to see if there's been some sort of a decision or not, or if there's been a request to extend, or if there's been a blanket stay. This could go either way. I think at the end of the next 2 weeks or so, Arkansas media, as well as our viewers, are going to be very well versed on death penalty and execution protocol, because we've covered it so far, and this is just the second round of multiple executions, top to bottom at this point.
Yeah, and depending on what happens really in the next 3 or so minutes, that could be a telltale sign of what happens the rest of the night. And again, if you look back on Monday, that death warrant expired at midnight. And would we possibly be looking, at another death warrant expiration date at midnight? We really don't know, and hopefully, we'll learn here in the next few minutes.
So Ashley, that's where we are. We're kind of a holding pattern here, but as I mentioned, the silence is deafening, because we're not getting anything here. I'm trying to imagine we're not getting anything because the Department of Correction is not getting anything. We're all waiting for the 8th Circuit to send something down, or perhaps the U.S. Supreme Court. Not sure if they're active at anything, or if they're just sitting there with their catcher's mitt waiting for something to come their way.
Marcy can probably answer to this too. This is not a situation where the justices are actually meeting. A lot of this is done electronically, and it's at least what we learned earlier in the week. A lot of this correspondence and what they're getting is coming electronically to them, just like what you're doing here on your computer. You've got about 8 windows open, trying to make sure we're not missing anything, because again, this is coming down to the wire. We're about 30 seconds away from 8:15 right now.
And I just wanted to let you know, so we have been able to find the docket number for this 8th Circuit, where the order came in for the temporary stay. And from what we see, the brief from the ADC has been submitted for review. The time for filing the subsequent brief does not begin to run until the brief has been approved and filed. Yeah, this was submitted at 8:13, or at least entered into the system at 8:13. So there are still filings going on at this point. I wouldn't be surprised if we get another order coming down from the 8th Circuit of some sort, given the timing of all of this, because it appears there's going to be any subsequent brief, if any. So there may be additional briefs, there may not be, and that's the process. It just goes back and forth in the legal system. You have a filing for a motion, you have a response, you have a reply, and it goes back and forth that way, the two volleying, if you will, for the court's favor in interpreting the law. So at this point, that is the latest information that I have. Pending also, the Supreme Court's review of those stays for execution that Ledell Lee has now requested after the Arkansas Supreme Court denied his request for those stays. So at this point, our clock shows it is officially 8:16. And it's unclear. I don't have any additional information on Pacer yet. There is a delay, and normally we have gotten communications from the Attorney General's office when we've been able to get it, and so we're really just monitoring right now.
And Drew's been a good resource. You know, he pointed out if there is no stay, this could potentially go forward, the execution of Ledell Lee. Even if there are some legal motions that are still out there.
And Jesse Teneur is saying inside the Cummins unit, it's 8:15, and we haven't been told anything from inside about the 8th Circuit's temporary stay or Supreme Court. I think we're all a little bit in the same boat.
And she even pointed out the media witnesses that have already been selected to view the execution, say it was to take place tonight. They came back to the media room. We haven't heard if they have been put back on the van to head. It's about, I think, a minute or two drive from where they are. It's basically a cafeteria inside there. The media is just all sitting inside waiting. That's where they get all of their updates. So this is something new we can pass along.
All right, we've got from the Supreme Court of the United States, stayed until 9:30 p.m. Eastern.
So that's less than 15 minutes.
Yes, from the Supreme Court of the United States.
So it just extended it by 15 minutes.
Right. Yes.
Have you ever? I mean, that's last time it was.
We did mention that the Supreme
hour.
Court could issue a stay to give the parties time to file motions and to do all of these things, but 9:30 p.m. Eastern, that's 15 minutes from now.
So would this give time down at the 8th Circuit? Is that they're trying to,
or give the Supreme Court time to review these new applications for
because there are new ones.
Do we have Drew with us right now?
That would be great if we did. We could.
Yeah. Drew,
I'm here.
Did you see this temporary order? What have you been able to read over it yet?
You know, that one didn't come. I got them all until now. So
well, it's just sent out by the AG's office here in Arkansas, Drew.
Oh, yeah.
15 minutes.
Okay, wait,
it's one page.
Here we go.
This is what it looks like.
In. It just came in. You know, the technology, I guess, is not reaching us yet here in the nation's capital. But yeah, okay. So I see, 8:30 here Eastern time. That's in 12 minutes. So,
right.
I think that is kind of the Supreme Court saying, basically, you know, we want 15 minutes after when the 8th Circuit was supposed to, make their ruling, that we want an additional 15 minutes to consider these latest challenges that we were just talking about. Obviously, a lot of stuff flying around here. We still haven't heard what the 8th Circuit is going to say, and we've passed their deadline. You have to almost think that there's some kind of a back channel communications here where lawyers and top officials for the departments are able to communicate and get an idea of whether they should be expecting something here in the next few minutes or whether they should proceed forward with the executions, because it would be an extremely difficult situation to put officials at ADC and state government in if they're finding out this information at the same time that we are when these cases are put out by the Supreme Court. So everybody just waiting to see what these courts are going to rule here, and as we've again gone past the time limit without actually hearing anything.
And, I thought it was interesting, Drew, in speaking with the Attorney General's office, the spokesperson over there said this could be a possibility. The Supreme Court could step in and issue its own temporary stay to give time for legal filings or to make decisions. But I guess I didn't quite anticipate it being 15 minutes to do so.
That makes it appears like they're close to, would that mean close to a decision? Or?
It would seem to be, based off, I don't know, Drew, you jump in here too, because I'm wondering, you've got several applications for stay of execution.
Yeah, and we're seeing from Jesse Tenor too something related to this.
Yep, until 8:30. So they're getting the same
information. They're seeing this information after we are, but we do know that Lee is still in that holding cell, which he has been in since yesterday, next to the death chamber.
Right.
And it it seems like, I was just going to say, it seems like at this point you have pretty skeptical Supreme Court as far as further delays, at least in
and
the
we have,
execution.
I'm sorry, we've got another delay from
today.
the 8th Circuit until 9:15 Central. So this just came up. I didn't mean to interrupt you, Drew. I apologize.
No, that's
but we do have a 9:15 order from the 8th Circuit Court giving Ledell Lee more time. I'm trying to pull it up. This is not fast technology out here. On the court's own motion, it is hereby ordered that the execution of Ledell Lee is temporarily stayed to permit the court to consider the motion for stay of execution and the response. So they inserted a new time. It would appear that they are still considering the same issues. 9:15 Central is now the new time that the stay is in place.
Similar to what we saw right at 7 o'clock, that temporary stay. This is just extending the time. That first one was 8:15. Now it looks like they will have until 9:30 now, Central Time. 9:15. So exactly an hour from that original one.
I'm sorry.
We're trying to get the information out.
Trying to get the information out to everyone,
our viewers. And Bob, you're getting this information as we are. What is the reaction there? It almost feels like we're heading toward this situation where we could be inching closer to midnight again with this latest temporary stay from the appellate court.
If we're going up to 9:15, I would say we're well. You know what? I'm not going to speculate. If we're going up to 9:15, I'll say we're inching up to 9:15. We'll see what happens at that point. But we know Ledell Lee remains in that holding cell at this point, and have not seen any activity as far as any of the media witnesses being moved out of the media room into vans and then brought out that way, because no one really knows what's happening here. But one thing I would like to ask both Drew and Marcy, from an observer's point of view, and talking to viewers who are watching this and who are emailing and asking questions. This conviction was in 1995. There have been a number of appeals and motions filed over the last 20 years. The family has seen all of those. There have been clemency hearings and everything like that. What is it now that all of a sudden throws these courts into high gear over everything that seems to be coming their way over this case? I mean, when do you get to a point where this is no longer prudent and we're not getting any place, and this in itself becomes cruel and unusual punishment, because you've got an inmate sitting there. Yes, he's going to be executed. No, he's not. Maybe so. We're going to wait. There's a lot going on, and perhaps it's the fact that the pending execution puts things under a much larger magnifying glass for the court, and they want to take a closer look at some of these things, or they believe that there's some kind of valid argument here. Drew, your take on that?
Well, I mean, it's hard to see into the room of the United States Supreme Court. We are not there, and some of these, I understand, some of these issues are being talked about over teleconference, and you have a court that is getting motions by the minute. It's not just the Supreme Court. The 8th District Court of Appeals is getting them as well. So they are very aware of that everybody back in Arkansas is hanging on to their every word as they are delivered, and they are making an effort to try to get these rulings out as expeditiously as they possibly can. But when you have a death penalty case like this and the finality of the outcome, if they are to go forward, it's not uncommon in these cases to have incremental delays and it go right up to that midnight time when the execution, the death warrant expires. So you can only imagine what it would be like to be in that room and hear these Supreme Court justices arguing this out and trying to figure out a way forward when they have motions kind of coming at them from all different directions.
I mean, there's no doubt about it. I had mentioned earlier, too, that the system is on display here, and for everyone to see that the system takes a look at everything it possibly can, especially when a person's life hangs in the balance. Have to remember, too, the family of the life that was taken is sitting here, the same thing, and they're going through all this themselves. So it's a long, arduous process, to say the least, and I think that's very palpable here. Looking at some of the folks that are here, the ADC professionals, this is what they do, but yet again, this is a very long day, second time around, and not going to be the last.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult for everyone involved. It's difficult for the families of the victims. It's difficult for the family of the condemned inmates. You know, they are innocent in this as well, and they are in a situation where, just like the family of the victims, where they think there is going to be some finality to this, and then it's not. I mean, this has been going on for years and years. So it's difficult for the families, it's difficult for the prison workers, and it's difficult for the justice system. But because these are such sensitive cases, it's extremely difficult, and their lawyers are going to fight for them on their behalf until the very last moment. And that's why it's not uncommon for executions to move forward even with pending legal issues if there are not the votes on the United States Supreme Court to put a stay in place. That takes 5 votes, and it's happened before that even though there were pending legal issues, the court won't issue a stay and the execution goes forward. That's a case that we could see in Arkansas.
As we wait for word from the court, Mitch McCoy joining us now. You just got out of the media center there. And are we getting anything from ADC at this point, or just they're sitting and waiting as well?
Just a hair, just a little bit of information. The public information officer came out for just a very brief moment, provided maybe 45 seconds worth of information talking about the Supreme Court decision, and then we were able to get off at one question, and that is, where is Ledell Lee right now? And he said that Ledell Lee is in a cell adjacent to the death chamber, and they're just now waiting for that Supreme Court decision.
So it's still very little activity. And the media witnesses, as far as you know, you've seen them in there, and the other witnesses, no one has been moved closer to the death chamber.
Right. So the media witnesses were told to go back inside the media room. They have their backups waiting for them, somebody to still cover what's happening in the media room when they leave to go to the death chamber. So those backups are in place. They're ready to go. But those media witnesses, the press representatives, they are in that media room right behind us, and they're waiting for their escort to the death chamber.
So it is a waiting game all the way around. Here, outside, inside, outside the death chamber as well. And you know, it's one of those things that, as Drew mentioned, that this is a very they're all sensitive, right? Cases like this, and the wheels of justice grind slow, but they grind fine, and we're seeing that on display tonight, guys.
Well, thank you guys for that update there. What we do know at this point, it's 8:28. Nothing is going to happen between now and 9:15, right, Marcy?
Based on a court has the prerogative to lift a stay that it issues itself, but normally we would expect that it would give itself that time. If it has prescribed 9:15, we would anticipate it would go until then. Yeah.
Right. And we haven't really heard a lot from the governor's office right now, but J.R. Davis, he did tweet out to us to caution us about what we're seeing on Twitter right now, just cautioning us to listen to what we're getting from the high-ups in both the AG's office and the governor. So to listen, we've got that email pulled up there from Judd Deere. He's a spokesperson for the AG's office. So he wants to make sure that we're getting accurate information out from the state. So we will, of course, update you if we get anything. We do know the governor at one point tonight, he was at the state capitol, actually. That's where he was going to be when we thought this was going to be carried out earlier in the night at about 7. So we don't know if he's moved to the mansion or not. Hopefully JR can update us on that. He has been at Cummins Unit coming out periodically to give some updates. At least he was on Monday.
And it is a big flow of information. There are a lot of different entities involved right now. You have the Arkansas Department of Corrections, you have the Arkansas Attorney General's office, you have the Arkansas Governor's office, and then you've also got the Federal Public Defender's Office. You've got independent attorneys who are coming in from the Innocence Project and ACLU, and now we have the United States Supreme Court and the 8th Circuit Court. It's just a lot of moving parts, and sort of like Bob said, the wheels of justice can grind slow, but they grind fine. And at this point, we're in that area. So, and right now we wait and see what happens next.
Right, and as we wait, we can at least remind you about this case that brought us here to tonight. It stems all the way back to 1993, the murder of Deborah Reese. She lived in Jacksonville. Ledell Lee was convicted for that crime. He robbed, strangled, and beat her with a tire thumper. She was 26 years old at the time when this all happened. Ledell Lee has been on death row since 1995. We want to join Bob Clausen again. He is live outside the Cummins Unit. Bob, what do you have?
Yeah, we're just getting an update from the governor's office. Stephanie Sharp joining us now. You spoke to the governor's spokesperson. What do we have?
Yeah, we just spoke with the spokesperson, J.R. Davis. He basically said that, this is all just really pretty much confusing right now. There's a lot going on, a lot of moving parts. He basically said that the Supreme Court issued a stay in this, and also the 8th Circuit. So those are the things that we have been following. He said that basically we just have to wait until that 9/15 stay, whatever the 8th Circuit has to say. So basically he says that this is just pretty much just really confusing for everybody, and they're right alongside us. They're waiting to hear what these court's decisions are. So he just came by to update us a little bit about what he knows and what he's kind of relaying back to the governor, because everybody really is just kind of waiting on pins and needles right now.
It's almost being completely lost, that someone giving you a roadmap out of where you are, but you don't know where you are, so you don't know how to get out of where you are, if that makes any sense at all.
Exactly.
So I think it is. But, this, and I just certainly don't want to make light of the situation, but this makes absolute sense to the justices at the 8th Circuit and, of course, the U.S. Supreme Court. And that's what we're hoping, and we will find out what they decide.
Exactly. And everyone is just waiting on what the court's decisions is. So until that point in time, we're just kind of waiting. I didn't know. We actually do have the spokesperson, JR, right here. Thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, well, where are we at? Is at this, complete holding pattern, and where's the governor this evening?
Well, the governor's at the Capitol. He's in his office right now. Obviously, it's a complicated process at this point. We are in a bit of a holding pattern, but at this point, the last order put out by the Supreme Court issued a stay for 8:30 Central Time, but with an order of basically, if the 8th Circuit has a stay that's longer, that'll be the new stay in place, which is 9/15. So that's where we are. We are in a bit of a holding pattern, but that's the latest information at this point.
What does this do from the state standpoint as far as, and it may be difficult for you to answer this, but as far as moving forward with executions in the state? Is there any discussion in the governor's office that something needs to change to make this more of a cut and dry process, for lack of better terms? Because we've had an argument over 2 of the drugs that held things up. Then we had argument over post-conviction DNA, perhaps that comes into play, and there's a whole myriad of things that are taking all of these planned executions off the table, doing completely nothing for the families involved hoping for justice.
Well, I don't know if you saw that statement this afternoon from the 28 elected prosecutors who were very firm in the fact that there is no concern of guilt in this case. These individuals are guilty of their crimes. They've been litigated over decades, and the fact is these are blocks for justice is what we're trying to do. This is a sentence handed down by a jury to carry out capital punishment. In the most heinous situations, it has to be a unanimous vote. We've done this. That's why we're here tonight. Obviously, it's part of the process in a death penalty case. You have a lot of litigation ongoing, so that's part of it. But what we hope happens tonight is that justice is carried out, and it's a long time coming.
As a former prosecutor, the governor also has to think and understand, too, that since the state has not done this in 12 years, that there's a lot of rust to knock off the system and the wheels and try to figure this whole thing out, and a lot of different people are in play and a lot of different laws and technology in place, so that perhaps there would be some growing pains here the state would have to go through. Certainly, I would imagine he was in that understanding.
Well, again, I know that he understood that once he scheduled these 8 executions, that would trigger litigation. He fully expected that. But while we're here, it's important to note that all of that litigation has kind of put us in this situation. And I think it's important to note again that the governor is absolutely confident in his decision, and that there's absolutely no concern of whether or not these individuals are guilty. They are guilty of the crimes they were convicted for and sentenced for. And so, as far as what's next down the road, we're concentrating on tonight. And the governor has the utmost confidence in ADC and the staff here to carry out this process.
All right, J.R. Davis, thanks very much for your time tonight. I think we will see you probably again before the evening's over. All right, J.R., thanks very much. So that's where we are at this point. Still a lot of waiting out here. From what I understand, a lot of waiting inside too, and a lot of waiting for you guys. I'm not sure if you've heard anything. I haven't been able to check Twitter just yet, so I'm not sure if you guys have heard anything new.
Well, we do know that there is a crowd right now gathering outside the governor's mansion. They're having a candlelight vigil. They called this extension, this temporary stay, an hour of hope. Well, they're using this time to now have a candlelight vigil. So we want to check in with Charmaine Nero, who is live outside the governor's mansion right now. Charmaine?
Yes, Ashley, not much has changed here. A lot of people still just waiting for any new development. Now, I'm going to step out of the shot just for a little bit, and you can see actually signs being held up. There's actually a kid out here holding up a sign, and there's everybody here. Still about 40 people. No one's left. A couple people have come, but they're holding their candles. And earlier today when I first got here, they've been here since 5:30, they were saying a prayer for Ledell Lee, and with every pushback that has come, you know, you can hear a gasp from them and just a sigh of relief, I should say. But they're here, and they say they're going to be here pretty much the entire time. So I'm going to step back in the shot now, but they are waiting here, and they've got one person actually walking around with every new development that comes, informing the rest of the crowd just what's happening, because it seems to be changing with every second. So they said they're going to stay here up until the end. We are waiting just to see how what the reaction will be once anything is set to happen, but we'll still be out here keeping you updated on how they are reacting to the news.
All right, Charmaine, thanks very much. And looking on Twitter right now, things that are trending, 8th Circuit, which is what you're keeping a close eye, Ledell Lee, the condemned inmate who was originally scheduled for a 7 o'clock execution tonight. Here we are at 8:37 right now. That has been pushed back. There's another temporary stay that has pushed this to 9:15, right, Marcy?
That's right. And J.R. Davis with the governor's office essentially explained that the United States Supreme Court came in. They extended from 8:15 to 8:30 here centrally, but then 8th Circuit came in and extended it for longer, and so it sort of supersedes that. And right now, and again, just to keep in mind the amount of cases that we're talking about, this is what the Supreme Court has had filed with it, and these are requests for stay of executions after the Arkansas Supreme Court denied those stays to Ledell Lee. So all of those have been sent up to the Supreme Court, and now we have these cases that the DNA testing and the other case that is currently in front of the 8th Circuit that it's considering and allowing time for responses. We have seen briefs filed in that, so there's active things going on in this. So right now, those are the two cases those are the two courts really that we're monitoring, and either one of them really have the autonomy to make decisions like issuing the stays that they have or saying that these executions can move forward.
And we're seeing these two courts because we have state courts, we have the Supreme Court also involved in this, and then we have federal court, so we've got both.
Yeah, we have actually the state court system has sort of moved toward the federal system. So we have the one area where they have been filing all these cases in federal court, and that has ended up at the 8th Circuit at this point. And then we have all of these state options that have been exhausted, and they are now trying to get the Supreme Court involved, which, you know, on Monday, the Supreme Court didn't step in and remove that stay of execution that the Arkansas State Supreme Court had put in. Likewise, on those other petitions and requests for stay of execution that the inmates had placed with the Supreme Court, it declined to take those up. So at this point, the United States Supreme Court has stayed out of it. I mean, aside from this order, that 9:15 Eastern, 8:15 Central, or 8:30 Central.
So they're acknowledging
extension.
What's happening.
They're aware, clearly.
Okay.
They are aware of what's going on. And this could either be to review their own cases of these applications that are coming in, or they're acknowledging possibly through back channels that the 8th Circuit is trying to, I don't know, that maybe the 8th Circuit was drafting its order to try and extend the stay, and the Supreme Court issued its own temporary. That's all conjecture. All of this is happening in back channels. We only know what the outcome is, and right now the outcome is that the stay is in place from the 8th Circuit until 9:15, and I may or may not wear out the refresh button on this computer by just trying to stay updated.
You're not the only person. I mean,
sure, everyone is trying to stay abreast of this, and we do have an entry here that the case has been submitted to a special panel before judges Jane Kelly, Dwayne Benton, and Bobby E. Shepard in St. Louis. And that was entered at 8:37 just a few minutes ago. So still activity going on in this case at 8:40 on a Thursday night. They are still actively working on these cases.
All right, here we are, April 20th, 2017. We are here because of a crime that happened all the way back in 1993. So it's just amazing to see what can transpire. You know, the families probably more frustrated than any of us realize through all of this right now. We want to revisit that case and how we got here with inmate Ledell Lee. Jesse Tenor takes us back through that case.
My family has lived in the shadow of this event our entire lives.
In February 1993, 27-year-old Ledell Lee robbed, strangled, and raped 26-year-old Deborah Reese in her Jacksonville home. He then beat her 36 times with the same tire thumper her husband gave her for protection. Her son was only 6 years old.
My mother was everything to me.
24 years later, Joseph Lucky, now a grown man, whose loss still affects him every day.
When she was ripped from my life, it started a spiral that I almost didn't recover from.
Lee was sentenced to death 2 years after Reese's murder. Prosecutors say she wasn't his only victim. Lee committed violent crimes against 5 women, all involving rape in the Sunnyside area in Jacksonville, several ending with murder. His victims' ages ranged from 17 to 70.
He is the embodiment of the evil that should never have to exist in this world.
After 21 years on death row, Lee maintains his innocence. He and his attorney arguing he deserves post-conviction DNA testing.
He's not here to ask for forgiveness. He's not here because he's remorseful for a murder he didn't commit.
But time is running out for Lee. His execution date set for Thursday. His victim's son asking one thing: let it happen.
Let us have some closure. Let this end. Let us step out from this shadow.
And we can tell you tonight that Ledell Lee declined his last meal. We learned that, but at about 4 o'clock he requested communion in its place. And also we want to point out his attorney Lee Short, who you saw in that story there. He is actually at Cummins right now. Also the son of Deborah Reese, who you heard from, who was 6 years old at the time of this crime. He's now a grown man. He is there at Cummins as well tonight. And as we continue to follow the developments, it is 8:43 right now. We're closing in on 30 minutes from 9:15 when we should either see whether this stay is lifted. It could be extended. We don't know what's going to happen at this point. We're getting information that the governor is at the state capitol tonight as all of this is unfolding. We've got protesters outside the governor's mansion in Little Rock, but at the Cummins unit in Lincoln County, where the death chamber is, it's very quiet, at least where you are right now, Bob.
It is very quiet. A lot of sitting around just waiting for some sort of word to move forward, because everyone down here is completely in a holding pattern. That's the media, of course, the folks back in who man the death chamber and all the facilities around that, all of the witnesses, and of course, as you mentioned too, the families that are here in attendance. It's just kind of sit and wait and let's see what happens. I know earlier you had asked about any other cases that you've seen gone down to the wire. There are a couple, but there's one that when you talk about claiming innocence up until the very end, there was a case of a gentleman by the name of and I use that term loosely, Eugene Perry. He was convicted of murder. He's actually convicted of killing a father and daughter in Sebastian County, proclaiming his innocence for at least, I guess, the better than 10 years that he was on death row, and then going through a number of legal proceedings throughout his incarceration and saying that this was done wrong, or I didn't have proper legal counsel on that. And then about 2 weeks before he was executed, came up with another thing he wanted presented to the courts, the fact that he says not only did he not kill those two people, he knew who did. And he presented me with Exhibit A, and Exhibit A was a guy by the name of Marion Pruitt, who was also on death row, who told me in a jailhouse interview, I interviewed Eugene Perry in death row, and then they brought in Marion Pruitt, and he said, I'm the person who killed them. And he told me exactly systematically how he did it. I won't go into detail, but Marion Pruitt's nickname was also Mad Dog Killer. He was a spree killer. So you had a situation where one person was claiming innocence, the other guy said, I'm the guy who did that. And the theatrics of it were somewhat compelling, but then could you take anyone for face value? But that was all information, too, that was passed along to the proper channels and the right courts, and they took a look at that, and they took a look at other findings, and it didn't delay Eugene Perry's execution a great deal, but it did have the court system taking very close look at it, even though they knew that they really couldn't rely on the word of Marion Pruitt. He also told me that he had killed a Georgia State trooper, buried his body on the Georgia-Florida line, and gave me a general area where it was. First thing I did was call GBI, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, said, by any chance you guys have a missing state trooper? And they said no, and that they were familiar with the story, and they said there's probably nothing to it. So, but still, knowing that this man had a record of telling not truths, they still took a look at his story and his claims and what possibility it was that maybe he was the real killer, because he was no doubt a murderer. Nonetheless, the appeals were exhausted. In due time, Eugene Perry was put to death by lethal injection here. And a short time later, I don't know the exact date, but a year or so, Mary Pruitt was then put to death. So there are a number of things that happen, whether they be right or they be wrong, that happens from death row. And if they're just trying to work the system, it's anyone's guess. And I'm not saying at this point that Ledell Lee's attorneys are in any way, shape, or form trying to game the system. They have got concerns that these judges are looking at, and the judges are taking a very serious look at it. If they thought they were frivolous, is what I'm trying to say, they wouldn't waste their time with them. But it is everything that has to be looked at. And I just wanted to give you a kind of perspective on how something that was coming out back then on a death row case, an execution case, that even though it seemed a little far-fetched, it needed to be looked at. So I guess that's a position to put everyone in, and that's why we're in a holding pattern right now, because there are a number of things that need to be addressed, need to be looked at, and they're doing that this evening. Marcy?
All right. Bob, thanks very much. I've got Marcy right here because we've got a last-minute filing that just came in at about 8:38 or so, just popped up.
Yeah, we're looking at, so this is the next entry after case submitted. It's a per curiam opinion filed by the court, and it appears to say that Ledell Lee's motion for a stay is denied. In this appeal, Lee challenges the district court's alleged denial of his motion requesting funds for these services. Lee now moves for a stay of execution. We deny his motion for a stay. To receive a stay of execution, it is not enough that Lee show a significant possibility of success. The motion for stay is denied. That is what I am reading on the court website, and unclear now. It's 8:48. This order was entered prior to the expiration of that
9:15.
Yeah.
We have the temporary stay for 9:15. I haven't seen anything yet from the Attorney General's office. Has been really good about keeping us updated, sending out the exact court documents that you're looking at, sending them out to us for all of the media to see tonight. So we're getting this information just as it's filed right now. We're trying to get it out so we can learn more right now. But again, what Marcy has learned that they have denied, the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals in St. Louis has denied Lee's stay of execution. It appears at this point, according to this filing that just came in within the last 10 minutes or so. It is 8:48 right now. Again, nothing is going to happen at the moment until 9:15, but we have this new... Right.
Currently, those applications they're going up to the Supreme Court, but its stay, as far as we know, I haven't been made aware of any other stay put in place by the Supreme Court. That expired at the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that we just want to reiterate that what we're seeing here, this stay that has been denied, is coming out of the 8th Circuit,
which had issued that stay until 9:15.
Right. So that it appeared they were working on something, maybe that you had mentioned at some point the Supreme Court may have gotten wind that they were working on filing something and needed more time. They were considering everything at this point.
It does appear that way.
And we're not seeing anything at the moment. We may just take a break, take a breather for a second while we try and figure this out, because we want to get the right information out. And Bob, you're probably hearing this just as we are. Have you gotten any word from the governor's office? Have you all heard anything from where you are? I know that the governor's spokesperson is there in Lincoln County tonight at the prison.
Yeah, he is, but absolutely, we have heard nothing pertaining to this or how that's going to change anything at this point. That doesn't mean anything's happening, but we have not heard that that has caused anything to go into action or even dress down any farther than it already is at this point. So we're still kind of in a holding pattern, waiting for what will come. And other than that, there's not a big update from this point. I know that Stephanie Sharp, she's been working the phones real quick and trying to see if anything's coming, but so far I haven't gotten any thumbs up from her that there's anything new. We're all still in a pattern waiting for, and it's one of those things too. Once things do go into motion here, they go into motion pretty. Is moving out here. We're all still waiting to see what, if anything, that news, the latest stuff that you guys just translated us is going to put anything into action.
I will say, I mean, I'm reading this. I'm checking with the Attorney General's office because they have been communicating with us fairly quickly when if this is what they're hearing and what they understand this filing to be. But in reading through it, it certainly, and we have another entry here, judgment filed. The judgment of the originating court is affirmed in accordance with the opinion.
So that's probably what we were waiting on. You think that
that opinion is the opinion of the court and the panel, and as I said, they have now twice in this opinion said that Lee is moved for a stay of execution. We deny his motion for stay. So I've reached out to the Attorney General's office at this point, just waiting for them to confirm that. Again, I'm just telling you that what I'm reading on the screen is telling us that Lee now moves for a stay of execution. We deny his motion for stay. And it's unclear now what happens next. When I had talked to the Attorney General's office, they had said, okay, they can extend the stay, which they did once, and then they could deny the stay of execution, which now they have done. And this is an appealable decision. Obviously, we have some appeals and applications for stay of execution already up at the U.S. Supreme Court. And so right now, there are already those going on. This could be appealed. And Drew, if you want to join us, it looks like you might have another application headed your way for a stay of execute or an appeal from this Eighth Circuit opinion, which by all intents and purposes appears to be a denial.
I am not seeing the latest opinion that has come in yet, so my email must be slow here. What is it that we have?
We have a per curiam opinion filed in the Eighth Circuit, and actually we haven't gotten this email from the Attorney General's office or the Supreme Court either. I've just simply been sitting here updating the docket, and this opinion came up, and I mean. It says now Lee now moves for a stay of execution. We deny his motion for stay. Again, it reiterates that the motion for stay is denied. And then we have an entry for that lower court judgment being affirmed. So it would appear that Ledell Lee, has had his motion denied. We are still waiting on confirmation from the Attorney General's office. Obviously, we'll continue to update on air, online, both in the 9 o'clock Fox 16 News broadcast at 10 in KARK News and on our websites.
That's right. And you can follow us on our social media platforms where you're watching right now. And Facebook is a great resource. We'll bring you any new information we get there first. Also, our Twitter page is a great resource to follow. But again, Fox 16 News at 9 will start in just a few minutes. We will take a break, and then we'll have some updated information for you. Hopefully know a little bit more about what we're seeing, whether or not we're hearing from the state tonight, confirming what we're seeing at this point. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you at 9 o'clock.
That's just Facebook.
Mic check, testing. Mic check. Mic check, mic check. Okay.
Yeah.
Just leave it on. Okay. I'm gonna go get
No mic over there.
Oh, shoot. I need to dial in. I'm dialing into 75.